Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start off with a song that some of you may be familiar with.
Our boys in line, over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere, so prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
Very patriotic song from 1917. It was inspired by the entry of the United States into what was known at the time in Europe as the Great War, what we know as World War I. Well, the war had started in 1914. The United States had managed to stay out of it all that time. We did supply our allies, Britain, France, and Russia, with material to fight their enemy, Germany, and its allies. But we stayed out of the war while we watched millions die on the continent of Europe. The technology of the war, however, was such that it eventually was inevitable that we would become embroiled in it. The Germans had the submarine, the U-boat, and they'd been sinking ships all this time, but they had been avoiding American ships. But in 1917, the war wasn't going well for them, so they started to sink our ships. And the song says it pretty well what we were going to do about it. We're coming over there to finish things for you. So a draft was instituted. 2 men from the cemetery would report to Camp Custer near Battle Creek. They would have their basic training, and the 2 men, on this side is Ralph Bennett and Bill Robbins, would become Corporal Bennett of the 310th Engineers Company C. This is his company right here. And Private Robbins of the 339th Infantry Company I. They're all part of the 85th Division, which was 30,000 men that set off for France in the summer of 1918. Now, from our history, you would think, okay, well, it's pretty predictable. They went over, they were in France, they were in the trenches, poison gas, machine guns, artillery. But that wasn't what was in store for these guys. History had another plan for them. When they got to England, they were separated, these 2 guys were separated off with 5,500 other men from the 85th Division, several different units, and they were put on a train, and they would end up on these 3 ships. These are British transports, the Somali, the Nagoya, and the Titius. And they would head north into the North Sea bound for Russia. Now, the British were in Russia, and they had asked the United States for help. And President Wilson said, sure, but there's some conditions, and these guys just happened to be in England at the time. They drew the duty, so they went. Archangel is a port on the northern coast of Russia, just off the Arctic Circle. They arrived there September 4th, 1918, off of Archangel, and they would disembark from their ships in the following days. The first thing they would really unexpectedly come across was they were under British command, a British general with no oversight or connection to the American command in Europe. At first, they were uncomfortable with that. They eventually resented it very greatly. Corporal Bennett, he was, Company C, was put in charge of the city of Archangel. So they took over the sawmill. They built a barracks, a huge barracks for the 339th called the Michigan Barracks, go figure. And they did everything in the city to support the city so that everything was taken care of for the Army. They functioned. They did everything except what their mission was, which was to protect and guard material that had been sent to that port. It was all gone. It had been removed. Private Robbins, well, he found a different thing. Well, here's the notice from the War Department that our guys were over there.
What's it say?
Michigan boys are in Russia.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Private Robbins was on a train going south, deep into the interior. Now, the land around Archangel was endless pine forests and swamps, Arctic tundra. This was the only railroad that went through. He ended up in a place called Oberskaya, a very remote and isolated point on the railroad between there and a place called Vologda, and eventually it would get to Moscow. The British orders came down. Put on your helmet, pick up your rifle. We're moving down the line. We're going to attack the enemy. We're going to push south. We're going to teach that Bolo a lesson. Or maybe we'll even end their revolution. And this was going on across the region. The American North Russian Expeditionary Forces, as they were known, and just as, going back to that condition thing, the Americans weren't supposed to be in combat. That was one of the conditions to the British. They were fighting the Bolo, also known as Bolsheviks. So these guys suddenly found themselves in the middle of the Russian Civil War as active combatants under the command of a foreign power. Not a very good place to be. And then something wonderful and something bad happened all at once. November 11th, 1918, the Armistice Day. The Germans stopped fighting. The good part, the war was over. The Great War was over. They started beginning to call it the war to end all wars. The world celebrated. In Russia, they had one of the most vicious battles they had ever had up to that point. A little place called Tulgas. So there was no celebrating there. And the bad part was that the order to go home, per the song, never came. So the soldiers are looking for the order, then they ask, they don't get an answer. Then the calendar starts to work against them. Now it's February. Negative 40 degrees below zero is the high temperature. 60 below was known to be out there. The Russians could fight in this stuff. They were pushing the Americans back. They were taking casualties every day. And the port was frozen over, so they couldn't leave and they couldn't have help come in. Very grim, very, very tough situation. You cannot imagine the tragic heartbreak of the families that got notice that their son or the husband was killed in action at that time. They just celebrated this war to end all wars just last November. And the rest of the families were getting really upset with the fact that no one could tell them when their boys are coming home. But the families took action. The soldiers couldn't do anything. They were spread across in these remote places no one ever heard of. The families got the government to act. President Wilson ordered them out at the first available opportunity, which is spring thaw, which was June. So our two soldiers would soon become Bill and Ralph again. But on the way back, they would give themselves a name. And they would call themselves the Polar Bears. This is the engineer patch. There's several different versions. They were authorized to wear this on their uniform. The 339th Infantry took it as their symbol. And it's pretty, it really kind of illustrates what they had to go through and what they had to be to get out of there. Now, when they got home, they found that everyone else had moved on. They'd had a whole lot of time to get on with their lives, and these guys were there, and they're still kind of wondering about this weird thing they've been through. And the only people that really understood it was themselves. So they started to get together, had reunions, and their first order of business was, we have left people behind, those that were killed and were left behind in enemy-controlled territory. We have to get them back. Now, the Bolsheviks had won their civil war. It was now the Soviet Union with no diplomatic relations. But they did manage, through using the VFW, to go back in 1929 and bring 86 sets of remains home. And on Memorial Day 1930, this monument, which is in the Whitechapel Cemetery in Troy, Michigan, was dedicated with 41 of those boys buried beneath it. And I think the remarkable thing about this, the Polar Bears, the one thing, they had been forgotten and they felt they were abandoned in Russia. They wanted to never be forgotten again. And there's been a service at the Bear every year since, right up to today. They'll have a 100th year anniversary here soon. And that was by the Polar Bears themselves, and then after they had passed away, carried on by friends and descendants of the Polar Bears. Now over there, There's a historical marker that tells that story I just told you. There's nothing here to tell you that. These two guys, they barely have anything that tells you they were in World War I. And if you did figure out they were in World War I, if you were walking the grounds here, you would think, like everyone else, like all of us were taught in school, it was France. But the cemetery tour today gave me the opportunity to share their story with you and honor them as the soldiers that they were in the place that they were. And that's the main thing that they always wanted, was to never be forgotten. Ralph Bennett, Bennett's Garage on Randall Street. He was also a member of the American Legion. He was a commander, and he was on the town council for 20 years. He passed away in 1955. Bill Robbins. Wind isn't helping me. Had Robbins Body Shop. Oh, Bill's son had the body shop. Sorry. Bill would work in the body shop with his son. He was the guy in the coveralls that had Dad as his name tag. And of course, they're both here today. And it's been my privilege and honor to share their story with you. And I thank you all for coming.
Thank you.